The warehouse smelled like rust and standing water. Zola found him face down between two collapsed shelving units, one arm stretched out like he'd been reaching for something when he went down. His suit jacket was soaked through rain and blood, mixed together so completely she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He wasn't moving, but he was breathing. She could hear it, shallow, controlled, like someone who'd been trained to manage pain and was using every bit of that training right now. She stood over him for a full 10 seconds. The storm outside was loud enough to drown out the city. No traffic. No voices. Just her, this man, and the sound of water finding its way through a broken roof. She crouched down and turned him over. His face was younger than she expected. Sharp features, jaw set even in near unconsciousness, a cut above his left eye that had already started to clot. 2 wounds in his torso, one high on the right side, one lower. The lower one was the problem. She could see it without touching him. He opened his eyes. They looked at each other. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. There was a long moment where the only decision that mattered was whether she was going to stand back up and walk out that door, and they both understood that completely. She took off her jacket. Before we go on, let me ask you something quickly. Would you still help someone if it could put your whole life at risk? If you like intense stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. 3 years earlier, Zola Ndlovu had landed at Incheon International with a tourist visa, $200, and a phone number written on a folded piece of paper. The number belonged to a woman named Grace, who cleaned offices in Mapogu and occasionally helped people like Zola get on their feet. Grace had been reliable. The phone number had worked. The $200 had lasted 11 days. The visa had lasted 90. She didn't go home when it expired. She told herself it was temporary. That she'd figure something out, regularize, find a path. 3 years later, she was still telling herself that, but she'd stopped believing it the way you stop believing something you've repeated so many times it loses its shape. Seoul was not cruel to her. That was the strange thing. It was indifferent in a way that almost felt like mercy, a city so large and so fast that one undocumented woman with good instincts and a willingness to work nights simply became part of the background. She cleaned 3 buildings on a rotating schedule. She picked up extra shifts at a restaurant supply warehouse in Yongdongpo, where the owner paid cash and didn't ask questions because he had his own reasons not to. She sent money home every month, the same amount, even when it hurt. She had a room in a narrow building in Mapo that she shared with a rotating cast of other women in similar situations. She had a system. She had rules. The most important one was simple: do not get noticed. She had kept that rule for 3 years without breaking it. Then the storm came, and she took a shortcut, and she found him. She knew, standing in that warehouse with her jacket pressed against his side, that this was the moment her system fell apart. She could feel it the way you feel a tooth going before it actually goes, a deep, structural wrongness that hasn't fully announced itself yet. She pressed harder. He made a sound. Not a cry, just an exhale, sharp and involuntary. "Stay awake," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not telling you again," she said. "Stay awake." Something moved behind his eyes. Not gratitude. More like recalibration. Like a man updating his assessment of a situation in real time. She worked with what she had. In her bag, she kept a small first aid kit, not because she anticipated anything like this, but because years of night shifts in empty buildings had taught her that small injuries happened and nobody was coming to help you. She had gauze, medical tape, antiseptic wipes, and a pair of scissors. She used all of it. The wounds were beyond what gauze could fix in any permanent sense, but she could manage the bleeding, and managing the bleeding was the only thing that mattered right now. The rain intensified. A section of the roof to her left let in a solid stream of water that hit the concrete floor with a sound like applause. "What's your name?" she asked. Not gently. Practically. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Min-jun. His English was careful. Precise. Like someone who'd learned it as a tool rather than a language. "Zola," she said without looking up. "Don't read into it." "I wasn't." "People usually introduce themselves when they want something," she said. "I don't want anything." I just need you to stay conscious, so I need something to call you. He was quiet again. She could feel him watching her work. How bad? He asked. Bad enough that you shouldn't be talking. How bad? He said again. Not a question the second time. She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. The one on the right is manageable. The lower one, I've slowed it down. But you need a hospital. No hospital. Then you need a doctor. No doctor. She looked at him. He looked back. His breathing was steadier than it had any right to be. Okay, she said. She picked up the gauze again. Then you need to stay very still and do exactly what I tell you. He didn't argue. She noticed that. A man like this, expensive suit, controlled effect, the particular stillness of someone who'd been in bad situations before and knew how to be in them, not arguing with a woman he'd never met in a warehouse at 3 in the morning, said something. She didn't know what yet. Outside, the storm had no intention of stopping. She settled in. The next 2 hours were quiet in the way that high pressure is quiet. Zola kept him talking when his eyes got heavy. Not warm conversation. She asked him direct questions and made him answer. What year were you born? Name 3 streets in this city. Count backward from 100. He did all of it without complaint, which told her he understood what she was doing and had decided to cooperate, which in turn told her he wasn't completely out of options. He was choosing this one. Around 4 in the morning, he asked her why she was still there. She was checking the lower wound, her hands steady, her eyes focused. She didn't answer immediately. You could have left, he said. An hour ago. 2 hours ago. I could have left the second I found you, she said. So why didn't you? She pulled the tape taut and pressed it flat. I don't know yet. You don't know. I'll figure it out later. She looked up. Right now I need you to stop talking for 10 minutes. Can you do that? He could. He did. But he kept watching her, and she was aware of it the way you're aware of a window you haven't checked yet on a cold night, not threatening, just present. She found a wooden pallet in the back of the warehouse and dragged it over, gave him something to lean against that wasn't a wet floor. She found a tarp, relatively dry, folded it into something that functioned as a blanket. She moved efficiently and without commentary, and at some point she realized he'd stopped watching her like a man assessing a situation and started watching her like a man watching something he hadn't seen before. Stop, she said, not looking at him. Stop what? Whatever that is. A pause. I'm trying to understand you. That's not something you need to do tonight, she said. Tonight you just need to breathe. He leaned his head back against the pallet. You talk to everyone like this? Like what? Like they're a task. She finally looked at him. He didn't look away. Right now you're a task, she said. If you're still alive at sunrise, you can be a person. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one, a muscle memory from before whoever he'd become had decided smiling was a liability. She went back to work. Dawn came in slowly, the way it does after a storm, gray first, then pale, then something almost gentle coming through the warehouse's high dirty windows. Zola was sitting against the wall opposite him, her knees pulled up, her bag in her lap. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were open, and she was very still in the way of someone who'd been awake so long that stillness was the only thing left. Min-jun was alive. His breathing had evened out. The bleeding had stopped. He was going to need real medical attention, and he was going to need it today, but he was going to be there to receive it. He was looking at her. You should go, he said. I'm aware. My people will be here soon. She absorbed that. How many? Enough. She started to stand, and that was when she heard the vehicles outside. Not one, multiple. Doors. Footsteps on wet gravel, organized and fast, the sound of a coordinated approach rather than a search. She was on her feet. The warehouse doors opened. 8 men came in hard, black clothing, weapons up, moving in a practiced pattern that swept the space in under 4 seconds. Professional. 2 of them positioned immediately between Min-jun and the door. 2 more moved toward Zola. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The man closest to her raised his weapon to his shoulder. Then Min-jun spoke. For words in Korean, delivered in a voice that had nothing in common with the man she'd spent the night managing. This was a different register entirely flat, final and cold in the way of something that expects to be obeyed, because it has never not been. The man with the weapon lowered it. The others held their positions, but didn't advance. Silence. Min-jun looked at Zola from across the room. He was standing, she hadn't seen him get up, didn't know how he'd managed it, his hand pressed against his side, his face controlled and pale. "You can go," he said. She looked at him for a moment. At the men around her. At the weapons that were no longer pointed at her but hadn't disappeared. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and left. She didn't run until she was 2 blocks away. Her hands were shaking by the time she got to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at them, dried blood on her fingers, a bruise forming on her left knee from where she'd been kneeling on concrete for hours, her jacket gone, her first aid kit empty. She sat there for a long time. Then she got up, washed her hands, changed her clothes, and went to her first cleaning shift of the morning. Because the floor still needed mopping and nobody was going to do it for her, and the moment she stopped showing up was the moment she became visible in the wrong way. She told herself she'd never see him again. She was wrong about that within 72 hours. He found her on a Tuesday. She was finishing her shift at the office building in Uedo, pushing a mop cart toward the service elevator at 5:45 in the morning, and she turned a corner, and he was standing in the corridor. Different clothes, simple, dark, nothing like the ruined suit. His movement was careful in a way that acknowledged the wounds without advertising them. 2 men were visible at the end of the hallway, far enough back to communicate restraint while still communicating presence. Zola stopped the cart. They looked at each other. "How did you find me?" she said. "I have resources." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have for you right now." She started pushing the cart again, around him, toward the elevator. "I don't want anything from you." "I know. Then why are you here?" He walked alongside her, matching her pace. She didn't look at him. "I wanted to thank you." "You did that when you told your man to lower his gun," she said. "We're even." "We're not even." "In my accounting we are." She hit the elevator button. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't come here again. This is my job. I need it." The elevator opened. She pushed the cart in. He didn't follow, but he held the door. "Is there anything you need?" he said. She looked at him directly for the first time since the warehouse. He looked like a man in moderate pain who was very experienced at not showing it. He also looked like a man who was not accustomed to being told no and was finding it educational rather than offensive. "For you to let the door close," she said. He let the door close. He came back Thursday. Not to the building, he was outside it, across the street, standing by a black car in the early morning gray. She saw him when she came out and kept walking. He didn't follow. He was just there. Present. Like a statement rather than a demand. She didn't acknowledge him. He was there again the following Monday. She crossed the street. "You understand that what you're doing looks insane." "I've been told that before." "Why are you doing it?" He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, not evasive. "I'm not sure," he said. "I keep trying to figure it out. Figure it out somewhere else. I'd rather figure it out here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she started walking, and he fell into step beside her. She let him, and she wasn't sure what that said about her, but she was too tired to examine it right now. They walked for a while without talking. Seoul was coming to life around them, delivery trucks, early commuters, a woman setting out fruit at a corner stall. "You don't ask me anything," he said eventually. "About what?" "About who I am. What happened to me. Why I was in that warehouse." "I know what you are," she said. "You think you do." A man in that condition, in an abandoned building, with 8 armed people who arrived before sunrise and were ready to kill a witness without being told to. She glanced at him. "I don't need a biography." He was quiet. "Does it change anything?" he said. "It changes everything," she said. "It just doesn't change what I did. I don't get to undo a decision after the fact because the information changed." He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the warehouse, that particular quality of attention, like someone recalibrating. "Most people," he said carefully, "when they find out who I am, they want something." "I'm sure they do." "You don't." "I want to get home and sleep before my next shift," she said. "That's the full list." They reached the corner where she turned off. She stopped. I'm not going to keep telling you to leave me alone, she said. I've said it enough. What you do with that is up to you. She paused. But if you come to my job again, I'll lose it. So don't. She walked away. He didn't follow. But 3 days later, on her day off, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered it, he said, "There's a restaurant near Gyeongbokgung. The owner is Korean-Nigerian. The food is good. I thought you might want a meal that doesn't come from a convenience store." She should have said no. She thought about it for long enough that it became obvious she wasn't going to. 1 hour, she said. 1 hour, he agreed. The restaurant was small and warm and smelled like home in a way that hit her unexpectedly. The particular combination of ginger and fermented things and something charred on a grill that her body recognized before her brain caught up. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she went in. He was already there. No bodyguards visible, though she knew better than to think they weren't somewhere close. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and she noticed she'd registered it before she could decide whether it mattered. They sat. They ordered. The owner came out herself to greet them, a wide, warm woman who looked at Zola and switched immediately into Yoruba, which wasn't Zola's language, but was close enough that something in her chest loosened unexpectedly. Across the table, Min-jun watched her respond in Zulu, watched the owner laugh and clap her hands, and he was quiet in the way of someone watching something private that they've been allowed to witness. When the owner went back to the kitchen, Zola looked across the table and found him already looking at her. "When did you last eat a meal like this?" he said. She thought about it. "Before I left Durban." He nodded. "Didn't push. Just let that sit." They ate. They talked carefully at first, then less carefully. He asked her questions that were specific rather than generic, which meant he'd been thinking about what to ask, which meant he'd been thinking about her. She found that more disarming than she wanted to. She asked him, at some point, what he'd done before he took over from his father. He told her he'd been in the military. She asked which branch. He told her. She asked why he left. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't leave," he said. "I was transferred." "To what?" "To my father's business." She understood what that meant and didn't press it. But she watched him when he said it, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hand moved on the table, the way a man looks when he's describing something that was decided for him before he was old enough to have a preference. She recognized that look. She just hadn't expected to see it on him. Things are shifting between them, and it's only going to get more complicated. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. It became a pattern. Not a relationship, not yet, more like a series of careful transactions that kept accumulating into something neither of them had named. Tuesday dinners. A walk once along the river, where they talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with crime or immigration or the warehouse. He called when he said he'd call. He didn't push past what she offered. She off. She told herself she was being pragmatic. A man like Min-jun having some goodwill toward her was not nothing. It was real, tangible protection in a city where she had very little. She told herself that, and it was true, and it was also not the whole truth, and she was honest enough with herself to know that. He was different with her than he was with everyone else. She could see it in the way his people looked at him when they were near her, a particular quality of uncertainty, like men who'd been given a new variable and hadn't yet updated their models. Min-jun with a woman was a known thing. Min-jun genuinely attentive to a woman, present, unhurried, leaving before she needed him to, that was something else. One evening in late October, she had him at her apartment for the first time. Not romantic, practical. She'd cooked, and it made more sense to eat there than to navigate a restaurant. He arrived without his men, which she appreciated, and sat in her small kitchen with his sleeves rolled up like a normal person, which was so incongruous she almost said something about it. He was looking at her shelves while she finished cooking. Books, a few small plants she'd been keeping alive through obscure determination, a handful of objects she'd accumulated over 3 years that had no monetary value, but had become somehow necessary. And the photograph. She heard him go still before she turned to look. He was holding it carefully in both hands. Her father, mid-40s in the photo, standing in front of a baobab tree somewhere outside Durban, laughing at something off camera. A big laugh, the kind that took over his whole face. Where was this taken? Min-jun said. KwaZulu-Natal. Outside Durban. When? She turned fully toward him. Something in his voice. I was maybe 12. Why? He was looking at the photograph the way you look at something you're trying to reconcile with something else you know. What was his name? Saipho, she said. Saipho Ndlovu. A pause. Min-jun. He set the photograph back on the shelf exactly as he'd found it. His face when he turned around was composed, but underneath the composure there was something she couldn't categorize, not guilt, not exactly, but something in that neighborhood. I know of him, he said. The room got very quiet. What do you mean you know of him? He sat down at her small kitchen table. He seemed to be making a decision about something, and he made it slowly and visibly, which she appreciated even as it frightened her. My father, he said, was attacked during a trip to South Africa in 2003. A business meeting that went wrong, men with weapons, not a robbery, something more organized. He should have died. He paused. A man intervened. A local man who had nothing to do with any of it. He put himself between my father and the men who were coming for him. He stopped again. My father survived. The man who helped him was injured. They lost contact afterward. My father spent years trying to find him to repay the debt. By the time he located him, he didn't finish the sentence. Zola was standing very still by the stove. The food was burning slightly and she didn't move. By the time he found him, she said. He was gone, Min-jun said. He died. My father was told it was an accident. The word accident landed in the room and sat there. He was told, Zola said slowly. Was told. Min-jun looked at her. His face was very careful now. When you say that, she said. Was told. You're making a distinction. He was quiet. Min-jun. I don't have information, he said. I want to be clear about that. I don't know anything. I only know that my father was never entirely satisfied with what he was told, and that he never talked about your father without, he paused. Without it costing him something. Zola turned off the stove. She stood with her back to him for a moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from his and sat down. Tell me everything your father told you about that night, she said. They didn't eat. They talked until 2 in the morning, or rather, he talked and she listened, and occasionally she asked a question with the focused precision of someone who'd been storing these questions for 9 years and was finally being given somewhere to put them. Her father had died when she was 19. A car accident, the official report said, on a road he'd driven 100 times. No other vehicles involved. A single car collision on a clear night. The family had questions. The family always had questions. But Saipho Ndlovu was not a famous man and not a powerful one, and their questions went nowhere and eventually they ran out of energy to keep asking. Zola had come to Seoul for reasons that had everything to do with survival and nothing to do with answers. But she'd brought the questions with her, folded into the back of her, the way you carry something you've accepted you'll never put down. When Min-jun finally stopped talking, she was looking at the table. I need to know, she said. If there's something to know. It might be nothing, he said. It might be exactly what they told your family. But you don't think so. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Can you find out, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes. Then find out. He nodded. She stood up and started putting away the food they hadn't eaten. He watched her for a moment, then got up and started helping without being asked, and they moved around her small kitchen in a silence that was no longer the silence of two people being careful with each other. He left at 2:30. At the door, he turned back once. Zola. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. I should have told you the moment I recognized him. In your apartment. I should have said it then. She looked at him for a long moment. You told me tonight. It took me too long. Yeah, she said. It did. She held his eyes. Don't do that again. He nodded. She closed the door. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after she heard his car pull away. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Zola almost didn't open it, Official-looking envelopes in her experience were either irrelevant or dangerous, and she developed a habit of letting them sit for a day before she dealt with them. This one she left on her small table while she got ready for work, and she was out the door before she thought about it again. She thought about it at work. She thought about it on the way home. She opened it standing in her doorway with her coat still on. It was from the Korea Immigration Service. She read it twice. Then she sat down on her bed and read it again. Her status had been regularized. Residence permit, category F6 reclassified as F2. Work authorization. Legal and complete. A reference number at the top that corresponded to an application she had never filed. She sat with it for a very long time. Then she called Min-jun. He picked up on the second ring. "Did you do this?" she said. Not a question. A pause. Brief, but there. "My father did." "Your father?" "He, yes." "When I told him who you were." "Whose daughter you were." "He." "Without asking me." Silence. Zola. Without a single conversation. Without one question about what I wanted. She was on her feet now, moving in the small space of her room. "I have been managing my situation in the city for 3 years. 3 years of working around what I didn't have, of building something functional inside the constraints I was given, and your father just decided. Made a call. Moved some paperwork. And now I have a life I didn't choose." "A better life," he said, and she could hear himself say it and know it was wrong the moment it left his mouth. "Better by whose measure?" "Zola. I'm not ungrateful," she said, and her voice was very controlled, which was almost worse than if it wasn't. "I understand what was done. I understand that to your father it was an obvious thing, repay a debt, fix a problem, help a woman who helped his son. I understand the logic. But my life was not a problem for him to fix. It was mine. Even the broken parts of it were mine." Min-jun was quiet. "I need to know," she said, "if you knew. Not before he did it. But after. Before the letter came." A pause. "Yes." She absorbed that. "And you didn't tell me." "I thought." "What did you think?" "I thought you'd be relieved." She sat back down. The letter was still in her hand. She set it on the table. "I need you to not contact me for a few days," she said. "Zola." "I'm not ending anything," she said. "I just need a few days." She paused. "Okay." He was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said. She ended the call. She used the days to think rather than to feel, which was how she always operated when things got complicated. She walked the city. She worked her shifts. She held the letter and looked at it from different angles. On the third day, Grace, the woman who'd helped her when she first arrived, called to ask if she'd heard. Grace had a friend at the immigration office. The paperwork had gone through at a speed that didn't happen naturally. It had been expedited through channels that operated above normal bureaucratic levels. Politicians' offices had been involved. Lawyers. People with the kind of access that cost serious money and serious favors. "Who did this for you?" Grace said. Zola didn't answer. "Zola. Who did this?" "Someone who owed my family a debt," she said. Silence on the line. "What kind of family do you come from?" Grace said, and it wasn't entirely a joke. On the fourth day, Min-jun came to find her. Not at her job, he knew better. He was outside her building when she got home, sitting on the steps, no car visible, no bodyguards she could see. Just him, in jeans and a jacket, looking like a man who had decided to come and had no exit strategy prepared. She walked past him and unlocked the door. "Come in," she said. They sat at her table. She made tea because having something to do with her hands made the conversation easier. He sat quietly and waited. "My father," she said finally, "was the most honest person I've ever known. And he made decisions. Big ones, fast ones, without consulting the people around him. He thought that if something was clearly the right thing to do was do it." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "It drove my mother insane." Min-jun said nothing. "He would have done the same thing," she said. "Your father." "My father." They would have understood each other completely. She looked at him. "That doesn't mean it's okay," she said. "I need you to understand that." "I do," he said. "I need you to actually understand it. Not agree with me to move past it. Actually understand that my autonomy is not something that gets waived because the outcome seems good. I understand, he said. And I should have told you the moment I knew. He met her eyes. That was mine. Not my father's. That was my decision, and it was wrong. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Tell me about the debt, she said. Everything. From the beginning. He told her. All of it this time. The ambush in 2003, his father's version of that night, the local man who'd appeared from nowhere and redirected the violence with his body and somehow survived it, the years Kang Dae-hyun spent trying to find him, the guilt that had never left him, the debt that had calcified inside him because he'd never been able to repay it. When Min-jun finished, Zola was quiet for a while. He saved your father, she said. And then someone killed him. Yes. And your father thinks those two things might be connected. Min-jun chose his next words carefully. My father believes the attack on him in 2003 was not random. He was targeted by a faction connected to a man named Choi Byung-soo, a businessman with interests in several of the same areas as our organization. Choi never moved against us directly. He worked through proxies. He paused. The same network that managed the attack on him in 2003 was active in southern Africa at the same time. For years afterward. The room was very still. You're telling me, Zola said, that the man who tried to kill your father may have also ordered the killing of mine. I'm telling you it's possible. And this man, Choi Byung-soo, is he still? He's still operating. Still connected to people inside my organization. Min-jun's voice was level and cold. He's the reason I was in that warehouse. She asked for 3 days before they did anything. Min-jun gave her the 3 days without argument. She used them to sit with what she knew, to organize it the way she organized everything, practically, structurally, without letting the feeling in until she had somewhere to put it. Her father had been murdered. She had believed for 9 years that it was an accident on a familiar road on a clear night, and she had carried that loss in the specific way you carry something that has no edges, no blame, no direction for the grief to go. Now it had edges. Now it had a name. On the 4th day she called Min-jun and said, "What do you need from me to move on this?" He said, "Nothing. I need you to stay out of it." She said, "That's not an option." He was quiet for a moment. "Zola. He was my father," she said. "You don't get to handle this for me. That's the same conversation we just had, and I don't want to have it again." A long pause. "Then, I'll come to you tonight." He came. He brought 2 of his most trusted people, a woman named Park Seo-yeon who handled intelligence, and a man named Lee Juno who said very little and understood everything. The 4 of them sat around Zola's small table and spread out what they had. The picture that emerged was ugly and intricate. Choi Byung-soo was a legitimate businessman on paper, construction, logistics, hotel development across Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Underneath that, he'd been a silent partner in several of the international networks that the Kang organization intersected with, which meant he'd had visibility into Kang operations for years. The ambush on Kang Dae-hyun in 2003 had been his work, not to kill the elder Kang, specifically, but to send a message and test a vulnerability. When it failed, he'd spent 20 years building influence inside the organization rather than moving against it directly. The people in that warehouse who'd shot Min-jun, 3 of them were connected to Choi's network. 2 of them worked for men who reported directly to Min-jun's inner circle. The betrayal was deep and it was old. "And my father," Zola said. Seo-yeon laid a document on the table. Siphon Lovo became a liability the moment Kang Dae-hyun survived the 2003 ambush. He was a witness. A man who'd helped the target. Choi's network identified him, and she stopped. "Say it," Zola said. "And had him removed. Staged as a road accident. It was clean work. Took almost 2 years to trace. 2 years to trace. Someone had traced it. Someone had known for years that her father's death was not an accident. And that information had lived inside documents in a building in Seoul while she cleaned floors in the dark and sent money home to her mother and carried the shapeless grief of losing him without knowing why. Min-jun was watching her. She was sitting very still with her hands flat on the table. "How long has your father known?" she said. A silence at the table. "Min-jun. He's suspected for years," he said. "He confirmed it 8 months ago." 8 months. She looked at him. Before the warehouse. Yes. Before you found me. Yes. She stood up. She moved to the window and stood with her back to the table. Outside, Seoul was doing what it always did, indifferent, enormous, continuing. She heard Min-jun's chair move, heard him come to stand near her. Not beside her. Close enough to be present, far enough to give her the choice. He was going to tell you, he said. When the time was right. When it could be handled without. I've been in this city for 3 years, she said. Your father knew who my father was. Knew what happened to him. And chose the right time. Yes. She turned. Is there a right time for that? Min-jun held her gaze. No. She turned back to the window. After a long moment, what do we do about Choi? What they did was careful and took 3 weeks. Seo-yun mapped the network of Choi's internal allies, 4 men within the Kang organization who'd been feeding him information and positioning for a full transfer of power. The plan was to remove them simultaneously, before any one of them could warn the others. Clean, contained, no room for Choi to know it was coming until it was already done. Min-jun walked Zola through the plan. She listened, asked questions, pushed back on 2 elements that she thought were structurally weak. He took the pushback seriously, which surprised his people more than it surprised her. She's tactical, Seo-yun said one night, after Zola had left. Yes, Min-jun said. Where does that come from? He thought about it. Her father, probably. The night it went down, Zola wasn't in the room. Min-jun had been clear about that, and for once she hadn't argued, because she understood the difference between involvement and presence, and being in the room for this part would have been presence only. She waited at her apartment. He called at 2 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. Done, he said. All 4. All 4. And Choi. A pause. That's the next conversation. She understood what he wasn't saying. He's not in your jurisdiction. He's in mine, Min-jun said. But the approach has to be different. A pause. Legal, where possible. Exposed. He's a public man. Public exposure does more damage than anything else. And where it's not possible? We'll have that conversation when we get there. She sat with that. Min-jun. Yes. What you did tonight, what you put at risk within your own organization, to move on this. She stopped. Your father is going to have thoughts. My father, Min-jun said, is the one who told me to move. She absorbed that. He said, Min-jun paused. He said that a debt paid halfway is still a debt. She closed her eyes briefly. Go sleep, she said. We'll talk tomorrow. She ended the call and sat in the dark of her room for a long time, thinking about her father standing in front of a strange man in the dark of an African night, redirecting violence with his body because it was clearly the right thing to do. The genetics of it, she thought. The genetics of people who do the clearly right thing. The betrayal inside Min-jun's organization has been cut out, but Choi is still out there. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the final confrontation. Kang Dae-hyun called her directly. She'd never spoken to him before. Min-jun had described him, a man in his mid-60s now, still sharp, the kind of person who'd built something enormous and ruthless and had the scars on the inside to prove it. She'd built a picture of him from what Min-jun said and from what Min-jun didn't say, and the picture she'd built was of a man who operated entirely on debt and honor in a world that usually picked one. He called on a Sunday morning. She was making coffee. Mizzen Lovu, he said. His English was slower than Min-jun's, more deliberate. I've wanted to speak with you for some time. I know, she said. She poured her coffee. You should have done it sooner. A pause. Yes, he said. I should have. She sat down. Tell me about my father. He told her. His version was different from what she'd pieced together from documents. It was personal, unstrategic, the account of a man who'd been genuinely frightened and had been genuinely saved. He told her what Siphon Lova looked like that night, tall, unhurried despite everything, with the specific calm of someone who'd made a decision and committed to it. He told her what he'd said, barely anything, just a hand up and a look that communicated stand behind me as clearly as a sentence would have. He told her that he'd never stopped thinking about him. When he finished, Zola was quiet for a long moment. You knew he was killed, she said. And you didn't tell his family. I didn't know for certain until 8 months ago. But you suspected. Yes. That was a choice, she said. To not tell us. It was a failure, he said. Not a justification. Just an acknowledgement. She held the phone. Outside, Seoul was Sunday quiet, a different texture of noise than weekday mornings. My mother is still in Durban, she said. She's been told her husband died in a car accident. She has been living with that for 9 years. Silence. She deserves to know the truth, Zola said. Whatever it costs, whatever it complicates, she deserves to know what happened to her husband and why. And she deserves to hear it before anyone else makes another decision about what's best for our family without asking us. Yes, Daehyun said. She does. Then that's where we start. It took 2 months to coordinate. Lawyers, a formal investigation that Daehyun's people assisted with covertly, documentation that would hold up to scrutiny, the careful assembly of what had happened into something that could be told cleanly and completely. Zola was involved in every step. She reviewed every document. She made every decision about how the truth would be delivered to her mother. When it happened, she was in Durban. She'd flown back for the first time in 3 years, legal now, her documents correct, nothing to fear at the airport. The feeling of moving through immigration with clean papers, of not calculating every interaction, was so strange she had to stand outside the arrivals hall for a few minutes before she could trust herself to get in a taxi. Her mother was in the kitchen when she arrived. The reunion was not something she would narrate to anyone, not ever. It was private in the way of things that are too essential to translate. She told her mother the truth over 2 days. Carefully. In pieces. Her mother asked questions, and Zola answered them, and her mother cried in the contained way of a woman who has survived things and knows that survival requires a certain management of grief. By the second day, her mother was angry rather than destroyed, which was exactly right. He saved a stranger, her mother said. And that's what got him killed. Yes. He would have done it again, she said. If he knew. I know, Zola said. Her mother looked at her. And this man's son, the one you saved? Yes. Her mother studied her face. Is it complicated? Zola almost laughed. Completely. Is he a good person? Zola thought about Min-jun on the steps outside her building. No car, no guards. Just a man who'd come and had no exit strategy prepared. She thought about him taking her pushback on the tactical plan and actually incorporating it. She thought about the ghost of a smile in the warehouse at 3 a.m, a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time. He's becoming one, she said. Her mother nodded, the way women who've loved complicated men sometimes nod when their daughters describe complicated men. She flew back to Seoul a week later. Min-jun met her at the airport. He was waiting outside arrivals, and when she came through the doors she stopped for a moment and just looked at him, this man who'd bled on her hands and found her in a corridor and sat at her kitchen table and moved against his own people to get justice for her father. He looked back at her the same way. She crossed the space between them. She didn't say anything, and neither did he, and they stood there in the arrivals hall of Incheon International while people moved around them in all directions, and it was the most public and least complicated moment they'd had since the warehouse. How is she? He said finally. Angry, Zola said. She'll be okay. She's strong. He nodded. Your father, she said. I'd like to meet him. Properly. Not a phone call. He'd like that, Min-jun said. He's been asking. She nodded. Then she picked up her bag, and they walked toward the exit together, and it felt like the end of one long thing and the beginning of something else entirely. What she didn't know yet was that Choi Byung-soo, 3 weeks out from the collapse of his internal network, had arrived at a decision. He was a man who responded to setbacks with acceleration. He'd lost his people inside the Kang organization, and the investigation into his activities was gaining traction, and he'd looked at the situation from every angle and concluded that the variable he hadn't accounted for was the woman. The woman who'd kept Min-jun alive. Who'd pushed for the investigation. Who'd been given, against every precedent, a seat at the table. Remove the woman, Choi had decided, and you destabilize the son. Destabilize the son, and the old man has no heir he can trust. The organization fractures. He'd made some calls. The call came from Seoul at 6 a.m. Min-jun was already awake. He was almost always awake by 5, a habit left over from years of military discipline that had never fully released its hold. He was reading when his phone lit up, and he knew from the hour alone that it wasn't nothing. "We have a problem," Seoyeon said. She laid it out fast. An intercepted communication, decoded overnight. Choi had contracted outside the country, 2 men, not Korean, currently somewhere in the city. The target was identified not by name but by description precise enough to be a photograph, a black woman, South African, early 30s, night cleaning worker. Min-jun was out the door in 4 minutes. Zola was finishing her early shift when he arrived at the building. She came out through the service exit with her cart and found him there, which was a violation of the agreement they'd made months ago, and she opened her mouth to say so, and then she saw his face. "Get in the car," he said. "Tell me." "Get in the car, Zola. I will tell you everything in the car." She looked at him for 1 full second. Then she left the cart and got in the car. He told her on the way. She listened without interrupting, which was how she listened to things that required action rather than reaction fully, quickly, setting aside what she felt until she knew what she needed to do. "Where do we go?" she said. "My father's house. It's the most secure location in the city." "How long?" "Until it's resolved." She absorbed that. "Min-jun. I have shifts. I know." He looked at her. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm going to fix this." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She looked out the window at the city moving past. The early morning light was doing something complicated with the Han River below. She'd walked that river a dozen times with him. "How is he going to come at me?" she said. "2 men. Probably in the next 48 hours, when they confirm your location and pattern. And we can't just." "We're working it," he said. "Seoyeon has people on both names from the intercept. We need 24 hours. So I go to ground for 24 hours. 48 to be safe." She nodded. Kang Dae-hyun's house was in the hills north of the city, large, old, discreet in the way that real wealth was often discreet. He met them at the door himself, which she hadn't expected. He was tall, her father's generation, with the particular posture of a man who'd once been physically formidable and still carried the memory of it in his frame. He looked at her for a moment. Then he bowed formally, deeply, the kind of bow that meant something. She was startled enough that she almost didn't respond. Then she returned it. Min-jun watched this from a step behind her, and something in him that had been tense for 20 years shifted slightly. They went inside. The 48 hours were long and strange. She slept in a guest room with the kind of silence that comes from serious walls and serious gates. She walked the house's enclosed garden in the early mornings. She had long conversations with Dae-hyun that started with her father and moved, gradually, into territory she hadn't expected, what the organization had been, what it was now, what he wished it had been, which was not nothing. He was a man capable of regret, which surprised her, and he expressed it in the specific way of people who operate in worlds without much room for softness, briefly, exactly, without using it as a plea. He told her on the second morning that he wanted to make a formal statement within the organization. To all of them, the old guard, the current leadership, the people who'd been unsure what to make of her. "What kind of statement?" she said. "That siphon Lova saved my life," he said. "That his daughter saved my son's life. That the debt my family owes your family is not a transaction, it is a recognition. You are not a protected asset." He looked at her directly. "You are family." Zola held his gaze. "I don't want a title." "This isn't a title," he said. "It's an acknowledgement. There's a difference." He paused. "Your father should have been acknowledged a long time ago. I'm late. I know that. I'm asking if I can still do it." She was quiet for a while. "Yes," she said. "You can." Seoyeon resolved the threat in 31 hours. She didn't share details, and Zola didn't ask, because she understood by now where the lines were and which ones she chose to see across and which she didn't. What mattered was the outcome. Choi's contractors were removed from the equation, and more importantly, the intercept that had exposed them had been turned into leverage. Choi's legal exposure was now severe enough that further action against the Kang organization, against Zola specifically, would accelerate his own unraveling. It wasn't over. She understood it wasn't over. Choi was still a living problem, and living problems had a way of reorganizing themselves. But it was contained. The formal acknowledgement happened in the main room of Daehyun's house, in front of 40 people who represented the organization's senior structure. Zola stood straight and listened while Daehyun spoke for 12 minutes in Korean. Seo-yeon translated quietly beside her. He told them about the night in South Africa in 2003. He told them what Siphon Lova had done and who he had been. He told them how he'd spent years trying to find him and what he'd found when he finally did. He told them what Zola had done in the warehouse, not as a story of gratitude, but as a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of someone who understood exactly what it meant. Then he said that the debt his family owed the Lova family would be honored for as long as the Kang family stood. That Zola Ndlovu was recognized as family in every meaningful sense. And that anyone who moved against her moved against the family. The room was quiet. Zola looked straight ahead. Min-jun was standing to her right, close enough that she could feel the slight warmth of him in the cool room. He wasn't looking at his father or the assembled room. He was looking at her, the way he'd looked at her in the warehouse, like a man who'd finally found the word for something he'd been circling for a long time. After, when the room had cleared, they stood together in Daehyun's garden. The city was visible below, strung with lights, enormous and indifferent as always. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible in it. "Strange city," she said. "You could leave," he said. "Any time. Your papers are clean. You could go anywhere." "I know. And?" She looked at the lights for a long moment. "And I'm still here," she said. He turned toward her. She turned toward him. 3 feet of garden air between them, and neither of them moved to close it, but the not closing felt like a decision they were making together, the same way the staying in the warehouse had felt like a decision, deliberate, costly, done with full information. "I'm going to be a complication in your life," he said. "You already are," she said. I adjusted. "It won't get simpler." "Min-jun." She held his eyes. "Nothing in my life has ever been simple. Simple is not actually what I'm looking for." He took the 3 feet. She let him. Somewhere in a high-rise office overlooking a city that wasn't Seoul, Choi Byung-soo sat at his desk and looked at a report from his remaining contacts. The contractors had failed. His internal network inside the Kang organization was gone. The investigation was advancing. He read the report twice. Then he set it down. He'd been in difficult positions before. He was still here. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Find me everything there is to know about her mother," he said. Zola survived Seoul. She found her father's truth. She found something she didn't go looking for. But the man who destroyed her family isn't done, and next time, he won't come for her. He'll go to Durban. If this story hit you the way it hit us, like and subscribe. Leave a comment. What would you do in Zola's place? We'll be back.